Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this is the Talamanca Review. And tonight I want to do a podcast on Christ and the blood of the Lamb as it's given to us in the Christian liturgy. Before I get into all of the details, I want to tell you a very interesting little story. About 22 or 23 years ago, I can't remember exactly. I could figure it out, though, if I cross-reference the dates of the movie and everything, but this was right around the time I had secured my first literary agent, and I had been given a directed rewrite on 2 manuscripts that I had first drafts on. And it was a very, very exciting time for me. Very exciting. And I needed total concentration for these rewrites. Now, up until that time, I had been working almost exclusively in the United States, and mainly Michigan and New York and New Jersey, the Northeast. And I was seriously considering becoming an American. I had been offered a green card by one company. That was Volkswagen Audi. And in Auburn Hills, Michigan, and they wanted me to. I missed that. They wanted me to be their senior technical writer, and yeah, let's go. There we go. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to open the studio. Thank you very much. There we go. Oh, sometimes things are just a little buggy. Computers are never going to do 100% what you think they're going to do. And, I mean, I'd always wanted to be a writer. I mean, the whole time I go places and I do things. I mean, people have always found me a bit strange. So, for example, when I was living as an emigrant in Taiwan from 92 to 94, there was a very active expatriate social life. People went out and danced and had coffee and mingled, and it was kind of a big thing for people. And I did, I guess, for about the first 6 months I was there. I got to know all the foreigners, all the English speakers, the Australians, the Brits, the Americans, and the Canadians in the town I lived in Taiwan, which was called Zhongli, which was just south of Taipei, the main city. But then after that, I never went out anymore, and I always get this reputation as kind of an antisocial person. Because what happens is I end up working on a book, and this has like been my whole life. My wife's going through it now. So, especially a fiction book, a novel. When I get into a book, it's like I can't. How would I explain it? It's like when a 14-year-old kid gets into video gaming in a big way. Like he just gets a mint computer, a super fast internet connection, and then all he really wants to do is game, you know. And all I ever really want to do is write, and write creatively, fiction or nonfiction. I make my living in a non-creative form of writing, but it's writing. I absolutely adore writing, and I always have my whole life, and it's hard. Writing is about one of the hardest things you can do. That's why there will always be work for writers. It doesn't matter how advanced the artificial intelligence gets or anything like this, there will always be work for writers. So it happened in Taiwan. It happened when I first came over to Taiwan in 2012 before I moved here. I did kind of a scouting mission, and I lived here for 6 months. And people were asking me to go out all the time, right? And I was single, you know, hey, let's go and try and meet some beautiful women. And I'd say, no, I got to write. And then people just, you kind of get a reputation like, there's something off with that guy, man. He's just, you know. And so this was one of those times. And when I got my agent, I was super excited, and I truly believed I could publish these first 2 books, and I did end up publishing one of them in Canada. But you have to do these structured rewrites. So if a good agency will have a couple people read your manuscript and make notes, and they won't tell you what to do, but they will tell you where they find a little bit of where you could maybe improve something, or, you know, what are you really trying to say here? But really what it all comes down to is the whole book has to be gone over again. They explain this actually really well in one of the last movies that Sean Connery was in, called Finding Forrester. And he plays a writer, a very famous but reclusive writer. And, you know, he said the first draft is with your heart, and the second draft is with your head. And there can often be more than two drafts to a book. The way they publish now, because the industry is looking to market the ideas and the ideals that they want to push, the writer is secondary, and they'll take a mediocre writer, and an agency will run them through 6 or 7 drafts of a book. And I call that agency literature, where the writer can't even say they wrote the book anymore. And they do this, and they do it to propel certain agendas. And they do it, it's big in Canada. Yeah, believe it or not, this podcast is on the blood of the Lamb, but I'll get to that, okay? So I rented a cabin up north, and like north of Toronto, 2.5 hours north of Toronto. I rented a little cabin that was adjacent to a house, about 100 meters from a house, and right in front of a lake. Like, you could hear the waves lapping at night and in the morning when you woke up, and really all day. And the cabin didn't even have electricity. And so I was writing on a notebook computer. I had no internet. And I ate one meal a day, which was 2 fried eggs, 2 pieces of dry brown toast, and 2 tomato slices. And the rest of the time I just drank fluids. So it was a kind of a partial fast. And because I was so excited to have an agent, and so excited by the possibility of publishing a book, I just put everything I was into this. Like, no distractions, no phone calls, no nothing. And I just lived in that cabin for 12 weeks. Now, I would take breaks once in a while, like I would take an evening off. And I would maybe go to a movie. I think I did it just one time. I went to a movie, and other times I would just go to the nearest town, which was about 15 minutes away. You had to go down a dirt road and get back on the highway. I got the meal at a restaurant. Um, so I would go to town and get a coffee. I didn't even have a coffee maker in the cabin. And so I took a stack of books with me, books that inspired me and books that moved me. And I read and I meditated and I wrote. And I was partially fasting the whole time. And this started in I think like middle of July. And it went until end of September, or near the end of September. And the rewrite went really, really well. I ended up being offered a 2-book deal. It's a long story, but let's just say every country has a version of Hollywood and the New York literary scene. And it's the same people. Very Jewish, very rapey. They're the same everywhere. I imagine it's the same in Australia. It just is what it is. They're like gatekeepers. And when I finished the rewrite of these 2 books, my agent was blown away. And he didn't feel he could negotiate. He was just starting out as an agent, so he turned me over to a much larger agency, the biggest agency in Canada. And then when I saw them and I saw what the business was, it just broke my heart that I could put so much effort and integrity into something, and the industry is just governed by these absolute leches who care about nothing but, getting laid and making money. And I just found it so profane. But here's the thing. So I was in this super lucid state, working creatively all day, every day, through most of the night, fasting, meditating, and reading scripture and poetry. Those were the books I brought with me. So this was probably one of the highest states of consciousness I've ever achieved and sustained in my life at that time. At that time. I mean, the state of consciousness I achieved was so intense I drew UFOs in. Okay? So, coming toward the end of it, and knowing I was almost done the book, I just had about 1 chapter left to rewrite, and I was really pleased with the way the rewrite came out. The whole energy of the language just went up a notch. It was just purely poetic and beautiful. And I decided to celebrate a little bit. So I went about 90 minutes south towards Toronto. I was about 3 hours north of Toronto. And 90 minutes south, there was a small city of about 100,000 people called Barrie, Ontario. And I went to a Cineplex and I went to see a movie. And I guess I went to like a 9 o'clock show or something, or a 9:30 show. But I was driving back up to the cabin I had rented, and I stopped at the side of the highway just outside of Barrie to get a coffee at a donut shop. And the donut shop in Canada is called Tim Hortons. I think you have it in the US now as well. I think there's Tim Hortons in India now. It's gone all over the world. But this area where I had rented the cabin was one of the... it's kind of like a Canadian Martha's Vineyard. It's called the Muskokas. And it's up in the Great Lakes. And it's also the area the ghost story I told you comes from. Okay, remember months ago I did the podcast called A Simple Ghost Story? Same area, okay? And there's a lot of rich people up there, and even some Hollywood celebrities have cottages up in Canada in the Muskokas. I know that Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn had a cottage up there. But I stop at this Tim Hortons, And like I'm just like completely lit up. I'm rail thin. I have a full beard and my hair is long and I look very austere and very intense. Okay? I walk into the Tim Hortons. There's only one other guy there. He's got his back to me. He's at the cash. He's a long time. He's getting more than just a coffee. When he finally finishes, he turns around and he's got 2 boxes of donuts, and on top of the donuts, he's got a tray of coffees. And the dude's huge. He's like 6'4", and it's Jim Caviezel, the guy who played Jesus in The Passion of the Christ. And I later put it together that he had been in Toronto for the Toronto International Film Festival, which has become one of the biggest film festivals in the world. It's been running for decades. And I assumed he had been invited up to a cottage estate with some Canadian producers or something. But it was 2 weeks before he was going over to Syria to film The Passion of the Christ. And when he turned around with the donuts, we met eyes, and he just froze, and he stared at me for an inordinately long period of time. And I could see that he was trying to search as to whether he knew me or whether he should know me, and his face was just bewildered. And I just looked at him. I didn't really smile or anything. And then he just kind of passed me and kept looking back. And so I was one of his last experiences in North America before going over to where he filmed The Passion of the Christ, which was quite an ordeal for him. Okay. Enough with the storytelling. Although I do love to tell. Hang on a sec. So, first, let me say first that I've always felt really, really close to Christ. I cried when I saw The Passion. I cry when I think about the Christ in the Gospels too much. I don't care whether he was really crucified or not. I know all the theories, I've heard all the stories, and I don't really care. Okay? All I know is it's an extremely moving spiritual story. And Christ was my first spiritual teacher. The Gospels were the first spiritual literature that I was introduced to. Now, when you grow up a Catholic, you refer to Christ as the Lamb. Okay, that's, and it's very bizarre wording when you get into the Catholic liturgy and the way the Christ is regarded. And none of the variants of Christianity really express the meaning of the crucifixion in the same way that the Catholics do. They don't, I honestly, I don't think they get it right. Now, whether the Christ was really crucified or not is debatable. But blood was spilled. Okay, his blood was spilled. Whether he died or not, I don't know. I suspect no. But the letting go of blood is a very significant thing. And blood is everywhere. And I did a whole chapter in The Devil in Us. Maybe I shouldn't be repeating this, but Santo asked me if I could maybe tie together the Third Temple of Solomon a little bit better, because he doesn't quite get it, It's like one of those poems you read in high school, and the English teacher goes over it 4 or 5 times, and you're going, I don't get it. I don't get it, you know. Poetry can be very elliptical, okay? Just, you kind of get it, but it's the comprehension and the realization just doesn't take. So, there are many mythologies about the Christ. One of the most powerful mythologies is that in the 3 days between his death and his resurrection, that he went into hell and he cleaned out hell. Okay? Which would be an extraordinary undertaking if he in fact did that. And I suspect that he did. Okay? And I think that the Christ was not even your typical avatar. Not like a Buddha, not like anything else. A very, very unique figure. Absolutely reviled and loathed by the Jews. They don't hate anyone in creation, in history, more than they hate Christ. To this day. To this day. You have to know them well to get it out of them. You can't really present yourself as a lover of the Christ or a Christian, or they won't talk openly to you. But if you make Jewish friends and you talk about rare and esoteric Northern Indian meditation and transcendental experiences you have, they'll open up and they'll tell you what they really think of the Christ. Now, their interpretation is, of course, wrong. And I'm not even sure it's fair to say that the Jews hate Christ. I think it's fair to say that the rabbis hate Christ. Okay? The rabbis. Wow, that's a lot of comments. Bibi Ladesh, I'm with Santo. I don't quite get it. Okay. I'm going to try and explain it tonight. So blood very much is a physical and an astral substance. So it fuses 2 dimensions together, the physical and the astral. It's used as a bridging agent. You build a bridge. It's a bridging agent in magical ritual, blood magic. This applies to voodoo. This applies to Santeria. This applies to Palo Mayombe. This applies to all the Central African black magic. All use blood. Kill a chicken, kill a goat, kill a human being, kill a baby sometimes. The blood is a bridge. So it connects the physical world and the astral world. You're petitioning the astral world with the blood. Okay? So you can offer the blood, and generally this is done with certain spirits that you work with. Okay? And everybody, when they initiate into these black magic circles, will have their own spirits that they work with. They'll get their own spirits, or they'll trap their own spirits, for lack of a better way of saying it. So, when it is said in theology that Christ cleaned hell out, I'm inclined to believe it, because I think that's what he did with his blood. When his blood was spilled, he used it to do what he did, which was kind of miraculous and kind of astounding, actually. Now, when you go and you study other religious traditions, there's no blood. There's no blood in Buddhism. There's no blood in Taoism. There's no blood in Shintoism. There's no blood in Hinduism. There's no blood in Sikhism. There's no blood. There's not, I could be wrong about this, but I don't think there's any blood in Islam either. So the blood applies to the Jews and the Christians. This is very important to understand the moment in history we're in. Okay? Very important to understand this. So in my shows, in the past, I have said that when you begin blood work as a ritual magician, as a ritual tata or godfather in one of these blood-borne religions, you have to understand that what you're doing is beginning a relationship that is very difficult to end. Okay? Very, very difficult to end. Now, when the Christ came, he undid centuries of blood work and blood relations that the Jews had built up with spiritual entities through their blood work, through the temple. He literally undid it. He collapsed their whole spiritual system. And this is why Jews fell into chaos for about 1,000 years. More than 1,000, actually. They didn't really start to come back till about 15 or 1600. He wiped them out. This is why the Christ is their mortal enemy. Okay? Now this blood magic, this black magic, is been given to the human race by the reptilians. They are the ones who gave this technology, and it is a technology because it works. Doesn't matter what your intent is. Doesn't matter whether you believe it works or not. It doesn't require any faith. It just works. The way the lights will go on, if all your wires are in place and your fuse box is correct, and you've paid your bill, when you flip the light switch on at your home, the lights go on. It just works. Doesn't matter whether you understand everything there is to understand about grounding wires, moving wires through walls, all the work the electrician does. You don't have to know that or believe that for the light to work. It's the same thing with magic. This is why I call it a technology. I gotta take little breaks and regroup my thinking, because this is going to be one of the more important shows I've done in a while. And I just, in my arrogance and stupidity, assumed everybody understood everything I said when I did my podcasts. And then I was talking to Santo last night, and, you know, he said, I really don't understand the whole temple thing. Can you tie it all together somehow? And he made reference to the last podcast I did yesterday. I can't even remember what it is. That's how long they stay with me. What was it? What was yesterday's podcast? I can't remember. But Santo said whatever the theme I talked about was. Inverting. Oh yeah, how the material and the spiritual work, and how these darker religions inverse spiritual technology. So you go into the low spiritual to make a better material life for yourself, when the real purpose of life is to use the material, the corporeal form, to create a better spiritual state for yourself. So it's a complete inversion. And Santo said he understood that perfectly, and it tied together a lot of the things that I had spoken about on my podcast that he hadn't quite understood, but that one podcast tied them all together. And he said, I still don't understand the temple. Okay. So you understand what blood magic is. I mean, I've spent like, holy cow, it's got to be like a dozen podcasts talking about blood and all of this, but I've never talked about the Christ. Okay? So the Christ wanted all blood magic stopped. He says this, it's very clear. He says, I'm the last sacrifice. So what's he referring to? Have you ever asked yourself that? Has the priest at your local parish ever explained that to you? Has the minister at your local Anglican church ever explained that to you? Your Presbyterian minister, your Methodist minister, your Baptist minister? Have any of them ever explained that to you? So when Christ said, I'm the last sacrifice, I'm the last blood sacrifice, what does he mean? Because the way we understand the Jewish religion pre-Christ, there's no human sacrifice. There's only animal sacrifice. Or was there human sacrifice? Okay? I can only tell you what I think. I think he was referring pretty much just to the animal sacrifice. Like Christ was saying, look, you don't need to kill animals. You don't need to do this blood atonement anymore. We're going to grow you out of this and advance you spiritually. But the Jews had become addicted to it, and they're still addicted to it. Okay? And all of this stuff we hear in the whisper chain now in the conspiracy world, you know, satanic ritual, who taught the world these satanic rituals? Who could even do that? So if you go to a foreign part of the world, if you're in Papua New Guinea and you're traipsing through the jungle amongst the cannibals and you come across a village and a tribe and they all speak English, what can you assume? Somebody who spoke English lived there and taught them English. Okay? When you see all this Satanism and all of this blood magic in the world, you know, like Ronald Bernard, the Dutch banker, talking about child sacrifices at the highest level of the banking world. Okay? You can be pretty well sure that a rabbi taught them that, right? I'm not being anti-Semitic. I'm being logical, right? I'm not trying to be anti-Semitic, right? I think I've been doing this podcast long enough that I don't have to say I'm not anti-Semitic. Okay? You've heard 360 degrees on what I think of the Jews. There's really good and illuminated Jews, Torah Jews. There's Jews even saying what I'm saying now. There's a very serious Torah Jew who has a YouTube channel in Safart, Israel, called Doreen Doughton. She says the exact same thing I do. She talks about the Sabbateans, how Judaism was corrupted, how Netanyahu's a psychopath and a monster. This isn't the Torah. Okay? Anyways, I'm getting carried away here. So when you go and you see all this magic in the world, this is the resurgence of Judaism. So they are magically running the world now. There are ancillary chapters here and there. There's whispers of other secret societies that are very magically powerful. People talk about the black nobility and a line of 13 Roman families that still, and that's all true too. Okay? But who did the Romans cross path with? Huh? The Jews. When we think of the Roman age, what do we think of? Do you know much about the Gauls? You know about, Hannibal Lecter, the Carthaginian warrior, okay, who tried to take over Rome, and he attacked it with elephants, mounted elephants. Okay, but you don't know much about what was going on in the Roman Empire. All we're really left with are Romans and Jews, because of the story of Christ and how the Romans got tied up in the crucifixion of Christ. Okay? So if the black nobility is doing these black magic rituals as well, They probably got them from the very same people that Christ came to chastise, the Jews. Okay? Just taking a look at the comments here. Boy, this is quite the chain of comments. Yeah, the sacrament wine, yeah. Mike Davis, you mean I just stuck this ice pick through my cheek for no reason? Do yourself an intonation, Mike. Go buy a lottery ticket, Mike, while you're still bleeding. Now, what went on at the Third Temple? Anybody know? Bueller? What went on at the Third Temple? Blood spilling. Okay? Now, the construction of that temple and the utility of that particular architecture is purely reptilian. I don't care. You can tell me that some ass jack named Harimba Biff was the architect. I don't give a fuck who you say it was. That's reptilian technology. It's magic amplification. Okay? So the Temple of Solomon is to blood magic what the Hadron Collider is to physics. It's an amplification of the principles of physics. Okay? That's what the temple is. There's a tremendous disturbance in the astral now, in the fourth dimension. People are getting possessed and bothered all the time. I'd say the vast majority of people on the planet are possessed now. Possessed or bothered. And one of the reasons we don't recognize it as possession is we've accepted the definition of possession that our other corrupt religious brethren have given us, and these are the Catholics. And they're completely corrupt too. They got into the blood magic a long time ago as well. Okay? Quietly at first, but they're full on now at the Vatican. Full on. Okay? The catacombs of the Vatican, I heard they host reptilians under there, and the reptilians attend their rituals under the Vatican. The reptilians are physically here, not many of them. Okay? And remember what we got from the Indian mystics, like Sri M. So the Naga used to live here with us, the reptilian shapeshifters, and they were called back to their planet, and a small group of them, I don't know what small would be, 100, 1,000, 5,000, 10,000, 100,000. I don't know what they would call a small group. But the ones that got left here got cut off from their mother culture, physically. Psychically, they may still be connected, but physically, they're cut off from their culture. Okay? So these are the reptilians. And these topics should not be considered conspiracy theory anymore. I have gone out of my way to show you folks how this stuff is all over the world. I've gone out of my way to point out to you how Buddha talks extensively about the Naga and describes them exactly as David Icke. They are reptilian beings, hominids, meaning standing on 2 feet. They are reptilian beings who can shapeshift into human form. Sound familiar? David Icke says it, and everybody says, that guy's crazy. Isn't that nutter who used to be a sports commentator for the BBC? Meanwhile, the Buddha said it brilliantly in his sutras, elaborated on it extensively in his sutras 2,500 years ago, and nobody can quite make that connection. Maybe it's the fluoride in the water. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. So, the Temple of Solomon is the Super Bowl of blood magic. And the Jewish religion is an astral religion. They may have some comprehension of time now through physics and stuff, but you have a higher comprehension of time even when you go to the astral. Okay? Time works differently on the astral. So when you have astral consciousness, you perceive physical time differently. Okay? So Judaism is largely an astral religion. Some of the rabbinical circles, I would say, go beyond that into the causal, and they start to talk about reincarnation, but they're not really public about that. They don't even talk about it in their synagogues or anything. Okay? So the temple it's the Stanley Cup, it's the Super Bowl of black magic. And it will supersede or take over and suppress and control all other black magic. Now, what do you think happened to the Jews when Christ broke their relationship between them being physically existent and the spiritual entities they were working with through the temple and through the blood magic? I already told you it's a very difficult thing to do. Okay? So if you blood into voodoo, and there's an initiatic process, just like Macbeth, by the pricking of my thumb, something wicked this way comes. That's all from Macbeth. What's fair is foul, what's foul is fair. So when you begin this relationship, it's like feeding a bear. So if you have a cottage in northern Ontario, or just 3 hours north of Toronto, there's an abundant black bear population there. If you were to leave your garbage out, like fish bones and fish skin and beef bones and organic garbage that had a rank odor, and you were to just put it at the back of your lot where your cottage is, it might be 100 meters away from your house. You did that every night. At first, small animals would come and eat it. Raccoons and things like this, maybe some fox, stuff like this. But if you kept doing it every day, sooner or later you'd bring bears in. Okay? So the bears are like the spirits you bring in through the blood magic. And once the bears come, it's very difficult to get rid of them. Okay? Very difficult. There are stories in cottage country in Canada of bears being tranquilized and helicoptered 300 kilometers away. And in 2 or 3 weeks, they're back at the same place they just got helicoptered from. Animals have this ability. When I was up to 17 cats, my wife finally lost her patience, and my stepson, we put 8 of them into bags and let them go in a town, down at town. And I don't want you to think that's cruel. They're all going to find homes, and they're all, none of them are going to die. And where we deposited them was about 14 kilometers from where I live. And these are domesticated cats, and I live in the rainforest. And my stepson did this at about 8:30 at night. When we got up the next morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, 3 of the cats had made it back. 14 kilometers away. 3 of the cats had walked through the jungle, somehow crossed rivers on stones. I don't know how they did it. I literally don't know how they did it. I don't know how they would even find their way back here. But 3 of the 8 cats found their way back here. I just had a cat come back last week. It's the only jet black cat I've ever had. He's been gone for 5 or 6 months. He just reappeared a week and a half ago. He's moved right back in with all the other cats like he never left. Question is, where's he been for 6 months? Why did it take him so long to come back and visit us? Amazing, right? Now, if you think the ability of a bear to find its way back to an easy food source, or a cat to find its way back to a place it considers its home, if you think that's remarkable, you should see the relationship you build with a spirit when you do blood magic and you start feeding it. It goes, it's just through the roof. And there's consequences to breaking these relationships. You can go crazy. You can be driven crazy. The spirits can attack you. It's like running out of food and you have 3 pit bulls. Sooner or later, they're going to attack you. or they're going to kill everything that moves before they attack you. Right? Maybe they won't attack you if they, but they're going to get really cranky and maybe nip at you, right? Same thing with spirits. Okay? So the Jews had built up this extraordinary relationship with their spiritual resources on the other side. Okay? And they had done this through their rituals. Now, when some rabbi looks you in the eyes and says the blood rituals in the temple are to appease God, and they define that God as the creator of all things unseen and seen and unseen, as a favor to me and as to show me a little respect and dignity for all the work I do in this podcast, can you please look that rabbi right in the eyes and calmly say, "You're a fucking idiot, Rabbi," and walk away? Okay? Because they are. They're fucking idiots. Okay? Or they do know, but I don't think they do. I think they're drunk on their astral power. See, astral power is a lot like a drug. Most drugs take you to the astral plane. Where do you think these machine elves are when you do the DMT or the ayahuasca? You think they're not on the... That's an astral expression right there. Okay? That's also a very negative chemically based relationship. Not as negative as the chemical based relationship of blood sacrifice, but still a negative chemical spiritual relationship. Ideally, you want to get your spiritual life to a point where there's no chemical relationship with the other side, that you're perceiving pure light and you're hearing the celestial sounds of the higher dimensions. And there's nothing chemical about that. It's beyond chemical, okay? So, the magic and sacrifice of the Jews kept going on clandestinely since the destruction of the temple. Or it was resurrected somehow. If it went dormant for a while, it was resurrected. Okay? And don't kid yourself, okay? When we look back on the Catholic Inquisition and the witch burnings, and in our modern perspective, we find that primitive, and if you ever said anything otherwise at a cocktail party with professionals and intellectuals, they would look at you like you were absolutely retarded. Don't come right out and say, I support the Inquisitions. I don't support the Inquisitions, to be clear. But I can tell you, they really were hunting down very nasty witches. Very nasty people. Maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing if we put a spike through Marina Abramovich's heart. Yeah, I just said that out loud. Maybe it would have been a good thing had we caught Jimmy Savile a little bit earlier and put a spike through his heart. Right? Maybe it wouldn't have been a bad thing if someone put a bullet in Henry Kissinger's head 50 years ago. Right? The point I'm making is until you have independent spiritual clarity, you don't know anything. You're just going to believe what they tell you in the school, and you're going to believe what the popular opinion of your time is. And the popular opinion of our secular, rational, black box period in time is that the Inquisitions were barbaric and rooted in superstition. I can tell you, barbaric, yeah. Yeah, I'll agree with that part. They were barbaric, but they were not rooted in superstition. Okay? If I were to wager a guess, I would say that the Catholic Church was trying to put out a resurgence of Jewish black magic. Okay? That would be my best guess. Oh, but Bruce, there's no such thing as magic, says the person who's been told by the media conglomerate controlled by black magicians. It's so fucking retarded. After a while, if you don't learn to laugh, you'll go crazy. You just gotta laugh, or you'll go crazy. Okay. So, let's try and tie this together for poor Santo. So, why are they going to get the temple? One of the reasons the black magic has proliferated is it's part of a multidimensional Hegelian dialectic. Problem, reaction, solution. Okay? Order, chaos, order out of chaos. Okay? So the world is so crazy now, and people are going so crazy that if the rabbis say, well, our Mashiach and our temple can restore sanity, peace, and the presence of God to the world, most of the secular people will either not believe it or say, what do we have to lose? Now, if they build the temple and a certain period of peace comes to the world, then they've won. They've won the psychological war, right? So how does the temple do that? Well, like I said, think of it like a bridge game. Everyone in the bridge game is a black magician. The Jews in their temple are the ace of the trump suit in the bridge game. So let's say trump is spades, the Jews are the ace of spades. They win against all the other magicians, and they quell that magician, and their spirits subsume the other spirits on the other side. It's basically like gang warfare for street corners in the drug trade in cities. Crips and Bloods. Really, the more you get into this stuff, you'd be amazed how it's almost exactly like how the world works. This is what I mean when I say you don't have to open your psychic centers and see all this stuff. Meditate for clarity, and I'm telling you, everything is right in front of you. What you lack is the discernment to see it and understand what it really is. And what you lack is the understanding of how the divine energy goes from pure energy to thought infused with feeling, to manifestation in the world. Once you understand those things, nothing will be able to confuse you anymore. Okay? It's very simple. Very simple. Doesn't mean you have any magical power and you can pick lottery numbers or you can tell people personal things about themselves like some ass-sniffing psychic. Doesn't mean you can do that. But you will be able to figure out a lot of these things. Okay? So, this is why I'm certain that the third temple is going to be built. And you can see it all being set up now with Trump. Who's Trump with? He's with Chabad. Who's Chabad? It's Jared Kushner. And Chabad Lubavitch began in Lithuania in like the 1880s. Coincidentally, personally timed with my timeline in The Devil in Us. I say 140 years, 1880 to 2024. Okay? The temple's not going to be built this year in 2024, so it's not 144 years. But my revelation to you about what's going on this cycle is related to these 144 years. So Chabad Lubavitch, let me just make sure of that. I don't want to misspeak. It's 1880 or 1860 it began. Okay? Yeah. And it began in Lithuania. Chabad, also known as Lubavitch, Chabad and Chabad Lubavitch, is a branch of Orthodox Judaism originating from Eastern Europe and one of the largest Hasidic dynasties. Chabad is one of the world's best-known Hasidic movements. It is one of the largest Hasidic groups as well as one of the largest Jewish religious organizations in the world. And the founder is Shneur Zalman of Liadi, and I believe that is... Anyways, just trust me on this, okay? It started in Lithuania, which is an interesting place for the Russian Orthodox movement that has come to dominate the world. President Milei in Argentina is either finished his conversion. I think it takes a while, a number of years, but when he got elected president of Argentina, he was in the process of converting to Chabad Lubavitch. Okay? Very interesting, eh? Now, what are even the Tatas and the Godfathers in Voodoo and Palo Mayombe and Santeria will tell you that their magic can take an unknown person and place them on the world stage for the entirety of the person's life. And these guys are like amateurs compared to the rabbis. Okay? Now, Chabad Lubavitch, which, Trump's daughter and 3 of his grandchildren are not only Jewish, they're Chabad Lubavitch Jewish. Okay? And they're a messianic cult. And all of the messianic cults are pushing for the construction of the temple. Because guess what? The Messiah doesn't come until the temple's built. So number one priority for an Orthodox Jew right now, get the temple built. What will the temple do? The temple will immediately commence blood sacrifice in a ritual way. Like to the exponential power of 10, what the rest of the black magic in the world is doing, which is just small temples in people's backyards and wood and sheds in their backyard. That's how the average Tata or priest in Voodoo or Palo Mayombe operates. They have a small altar and a small shed in their backyard. Okay? And then the Temple of Solomon will gather up a lot of the intentional energy, which is also a psychic or fourth dimensional energy, of believing Christians, which are basically Christian evangelicals, which have been sculpted and molded by Jews. I'm not going to Schofield Bible, okay, I got to stay on my theme. I mean, any one of these things I could go off and do a separate podcast, but I got to keep going down the road, so I got to close this. So the Jews and the Temple of Solomon are a spiritual lie. It's black magic. It's got nothing to do with God. It's an archaic technology that should not have survived the flood. Okay? And it's not going to survive much longer. And they're stupid. And you know why they're stupid? Because magic, just like being a drug addict, makes you blind. You can get what you need to get done. Like the average crackhead in Canada or the United States, or the average heroin addict in Canada or the United States, can, through begging, thievery, selling sexual services, any number of things, they can get $500 a day for their habit. Okay? $500 a day, 7 days a week is what? That's $3,500 a week, right? $7,000, it's $14,000 a month, right? 140, that's like $165,000, $168,000 a year for drugs, okay? So people motivated by these baser desires can get things done, but while they're getting those things done, they're blind to a lot of other things. They can't see them. And the Jews have been blinded, completely blinded. In my opinion, the track they're on now is literally fixing their own noose to be hung. But they're too obstinate to see it. They're too prideful to see it. And I'll be honest, I think Christ was their last warning. I mean, even God runs out of patience. It's not that the souls will be destroyed, what we call Jewish souls. They're not going to be destroyed. But that culture, those ideas and those practices will be wiped from the world. They're not going to survive the transition we're going through. Okay? They're going to be wiped from the world. And those souls who were involved in them for 6,000 years, the Jews say, will be recycled and have to start handicapped at a lower level of understanding in a new system. Okay? And it'll be the kind of the spiritual penalty will be worked out through their reincarnations. And some of them will be punished much more severely than that. Because this creation has a lot of punishment in it. A lot of punishment in it. I don't know if anybody wants to call in and ask a question, but this is what the temple is. So the temple will end all the magic in the world, for one thing. And then after we see what happens to the Jews, nobody will ever do it again. Okay? It'll be an object lesson for the remaining humanity that survives. Never get into this again. Okay? And the irony of all of this, remember how I told you God loves irony? Or let's just say, I shouldn't say God loves irony, but God often expresses himself through irony. The way the membrane of reality produces the incidents of our time in combination with our own thoughts and our own feelings and our own consciousness. The people who've told us most clearly that God doesn't like this behavior are the people who are doing it now. Isn't that ironic? Okay? For those of you who've actually read the Torah. They've been warned so many times now, but they're like crackheads. They can't stop with the magic. Okay? Because magic is so astrally focused, the astral is where all sexual deviance and fetish comes from as well. It's not physical, it's astral. It starts in your head, right? And then it goes to your loins. Okay, that starts on the astral too. And that's why there's so much sexual perversion and deviance in this culture as well. And it's just not going to be tolerated anymore. And look, don't feel sorry for them. They've been warned 2, 3, 4 times. And the rest of us human beings on this planet have suffered enormously because of their obstinance. Okay, so you don't have to feel sorry for them. Now, I realize the irony of what I'm saying now. The irony of what I'm doing now is I sound like them when they talk about Amalek and all their enemies being destroyed by their God. But they've got it inverted because God's blinded them. So their greatest desire, which is the Temple of Solomon amongst the Orthodox and amongst the Hasidics, and specifically Chabad Lubavitch, their greatest desire is the temple and the Messiah, but it will be their own destruction. And they're too stupid and they're too blind to see it because they've corrupted their consciousness through these astral addictions like magic and sex and power and money. That's the Talamanca Review tonight. I don't think anyone's going to call in, so I'm just going to call it a night and maybe watch myself some Netflix. Peace out, folks. I'm Bruce McDonald.